50,000 years ago, a Neanderthal man lived in a cave in Iraq. He was blind in one eye, nearly deaf in both ears and down to one arm. He survived into his 40s. That did not happen by accident. His community fed him, guided him, protected him from predators for years, even though he couldn't hunt or gather a single thing for them in return. Then, thousands of years later, a community in Russia spent 10,000 hours carving ivory beads to bury two children who had never contributed a single day's work to their own survival. This isn't about a funeral. This is about an instinct that existed long before we were human. Here's how we first thought we knew any of this. In 1960, an archaeologist named Ralph Solecki was finishing his last season digging through a cave in northern Iraq. Under one of the Neanderthal skeletons his team had found, they noticed something strange in the soil. Clumps of pollen, not scattered randomly, but bunched together in patterns. A botanist studied the clumps and identified the plants: yarrow, grape hyacinth, cornflower, some of them plants still used for their medicinal properties today. Solecki's conclusion made headlines around the world. 50,000 years ago, someone had laid this body to rest on a bed of flowers. It became one of the most famous images in archaeology. Proof, people said, that Neanderthals grieved, that they loved, that they were, underneath the stereotype, us. Textbooks reprinted the story for decades. Documentaries recreated the scene. A Neanderthal kneeling by a grave, scattering wildflowers over someone they'd lost. There's just one problem with the story everyone tells about it. Flowers don't survive 50,000 years. Pollen does. And pollen turns out to be a much less reliable witness than anyone wanted it to be. A small rodent called a Persian jurd lives in exactly this region of Iraq. And jurds are known for one very specific habit. They drag flower heads into their burrows and store them in bunches underground. Bones of jurds have turned up in the same cave. So have their burrows. Wild bees are a second suspect. They still nest in the sand covering that cave floor today. And fossil bee nests from the same era have been found nearby. Bees collect pollen in dense clumps too, for entirely different reasons than mourning. Decades of researchers have gone back and forth on this. Some still defend the flower burial. Others point out that when scientists reopened the site in recent years, the skeleton right next to the original one wasn't arranged carefully at all. It was just lying loosely, the way a body might fall if nobody positioned it. No offerings, no clear ritual. One archaeologist who spent years re-examining the cave put it about as honestly as anyone could. There's no smoking gun here in either direction. Not enough evidence to declare the flower burial real. Not enough to declare it fiction either. So the flowers are a maybe. But you already know the part that isn't. Researchers call him Shanidar 1. His skull shows a crushing blow that likely blinded him in one eye. His right arm had been broken so badly it was amputated at the elbow years before he died. His leg was damaged enough to leave him with a serious limp, and the bones inside his ears showed the kind of damage that would have left him barely able to hear at all. All of it had healed. Every injury shows the slow, uneven signs of a body that kept living long after the damage was done. A man with that many disabilities does not survive alone in the Pleistocene. He can't hear a predator coming. He can't outrun one either. For years, someone had to have been feeding him, guiding him, watching for danger on his behalf. Picture what that actually looked like, day to day. Someone walking slightly behind him on hunts he could no longer join, describing what he couldn't see or hear. Someone saving him a share of meat he hadn't helped bring down. Not once, as an act of pity, in a single dramatic moment, but repeated ordinarily for years until it simply became how his group operated. Now leave the Neanderthals behind entirely and travel to Russia 34,000 years ago. Two children, around 10 and 12 years old, were buried head to head in a single narrow grave. Both had clearly struggled physically. Their bones show signs of repeated stress, and one boy's thigh bones were unusually short and bowed. Here is the headline: more than 10,000 carved ivory beads, each one taking nearly an hour to make by hand. Over 10,000 hours of labor from a community that also had to hunt, gather, and survive an ice age, spent making jewelry for two children who were already gone. Alongside the beads, ivory spears straightened from mammoth tusks, a process that required soaking and slowly bending solid ivory without snapping it. Fox teeth by the hundreds, carved ornaments, an adult male buried nearby, fit and uninjured in life, was given a fraction of what these two children received. Think about the logic that would have to be running through a community to produce that outcome. It wasn't the strongest hunter who got the most elaborate send-off. It was two children who, by every practical measure, had contributed the least to the group's survival. And they were given more than anyone else in the entire burial ground. Whatever these two children meant to their community, it wasn't measured by what they could do. It was something else entirely. Put the flowers, the survivor, and the children side by side, and one of these stories is disputed. The other two aren't. A group that kept a broken, half-blind, nearly deaf man alive for years, with nothing to gain from it. A community that spent 10,000 hours of hand labor honoring two children who could give nothing back. Neither of these required flowers to prove a point. They already prove it. Two different species, tens of thousands of years apart, arrived at the same behavior independently. Not because someone taught them to, not because it was written in a book they'd read. Something older than culture seems to have been pushing in the same direction both times. And it wasn't cheap for either of them. Every hour spent caring for a man who couldn't hunt was an hour not spent hunting. Every bead carved for a dead child was a bead not traded, not worn, not put toward anything that helped the living survive the next winter. In a world where every calorie and every hour mattered, both groups spent enormous amounts of both on people who could never repay them. So maybe the flowers were real, and maybe they were a rodent's pantry. At this point, it almost doesn't matter which. The instinct the flower story was trying to prove, that grief, care, and ritual go back further than written history, further than agriculture, maybe further than our own species, never actually needed the flowers to begin with. It's sitting in a cave in Iraq, in the bones of a man who shouldn't have survived a single season alone. It's buried in Russia, under 10,000 hours of work spent on two children who would never know it happened. We still don't fully understand why. We just know it's old. Older than agriculture, older than writing, quite possibly older than our own species. Long before anyone could put it into words, someone was already carrying a blind man to safety, or spending 10,000 hours on beads no one living would ever wear.